Matthew chapter 2, the whole chapter, verses 1 through 23, is about Jesus having just been born. About 2 years of time has passed when all of a sudden in Jerusalem, these Palestinian, Babylonian guys, foreigners from the east, rich people, probably a band of them, appeared in Jerusalem and started asking where the Messiah was. Herod overheard and called them privately, said, "Go find where he is. He should be in Bethlehem. Go find him and then tell me where he is." They went out, saw him, gave him their gifts, and then, being warned of God in a dream, they left, or warned of an angel in a dream, they left and went another way back to their own country. Joseph, also being warned in a dream, went to Egypt, waited for Herod to die, and then he came back into Israel, where he lived in Nazareth, from then on with Jesus and Mary. Verse 1. Now, if you're following in Luke chapter 2, there's some places that seem like they don't mesh. I'm going to try to talk about how they do harmonize here. Verse 1. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. Okay, so the first thing is Judea. You'll notice that now in the Greek, Judah is no longer called Judah, but Judea, and this is only a language thing. If you look in the book of Hebrews, for example, it'll still call it Judah. So even though in the Strong's Concordance it says that it is a feminine translation, it has nothing to do with the current situation of, you know, like the Romans taking over them or something like that. It's just that's how it reads out in the Greek. In the days of Herod the king, this is Herod the Great. He was the great builder, the person who remodeled areas around the temple and built up a lot of different things. There came wise men, and these wise men, they weren't just wise, they were the most educated people of their area. They were rich, they were educated, they were stargazers, they were kind of like soothsayers in a way as well. Verse 2, saying, "Where is he that's born King of the Jews? For we've seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him." So these foreigners, they said that they saw the star, which is probably an angel, in their own countries, and they've come to worship him. Now the Jews were forbidden to do any stargazing. These foreigners, they would look at the stars, they would make constellations, they would worship the stars. So that's the reason why Jews were not allowed to do anything like that. They, however, would always look up at the stars. They could tell when a new one appeared, if a new one appeared like this one here, and then they would probably map it out. Verse 3, when Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Now why would he be troubled? It's because he is the king, and yet there is a king who's rising. He doesn't want to give up his power. And the people are troubled with him because they know that he doesn't want to give up his power, and there would be a war. Some people would join the Messiah, some people would join Herod, and he would recruit the rest, he would draft the rest, and then there would be a big war. Something similar to this happened in Jewish history in 2 Kings chapter 11 when the people rebelled, and there was a child who was supposed to be the true king. When he came, when he was a little bit older, there was a group who rebelled against the people who were currently in power, overthrew the kingdom, and then made the child the king. So something very similar to that could have happened, and they were probably aware of that. Verse 4, and when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where the Christ should be born. He didn't know this for himself. He didn't know the scriptures well enough for himself. And it's not to downplay him, because a lot of people didn't know scriptures well enough. So they needed the scribes, and they needed the people who knew the scriptures to tell them these things. Verse 5, they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it's written by the prophet in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, and thou, Bethlehem, and the land of Judah are not least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. And in a nutshell, this is trying to say, Bethlehem, even though you're a very small place, you're not the least significant, because the most significant person will come out of you to rule the world. Verse 7, then Herod, when he had privately called the wise men, because he wanted to kill the Messiah and he didn't want anybody else to know about it, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And as you'll see in some of the next verses, it's about 2 years or less ago that they first saw the star. They just had to search the scriptures. They had to search probably a lot of different documents. Them being from the Babylonian, Persian era, where that's the same place where the Jews were captured and taken away. They probably had access to the scriptures, and seeing the star in that direction over Jerusalem, probably one of the first things that they did was started searching through their scriptures, that they probably went through a lot of different resources and did a lot of studying. Took them about a year or so before they found out where it was at, and boiled down the conclusion that it was over Jerusalem and that was concerning the Messiah. Verse 8, he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go search diligently for the young child, and when you found him, bring me word again that I may come and worship him also," which they did not do. And also he's calling him young child, which at this time it says it's taken from the Greek word that means any child from infancy to a more mature child. But when the shepherds saw Jesus, they called him a babe. So it's just to show that time has gone by since then, and he's not using the word that's just strictly referring to infant. Matthew chapter 2, verse 9. When they heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star, which is probably an angel and not a ball of gas, which they saw in the east, went before them until they came and stood over where the young child was. Some people say that the star led them to Nazareth and not to Bethlehem, even though Herod commanded them to go to Bethlehem, that instead they followed the star which went to Nazareth. I do not believe that this is the case. I believe that they were in Bethlehem at this time. Verse 10, when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy, because they knew that they had met their destination. In verse 11, and when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened the treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now it's prophesied, and it's probably the reason why the song We Three Kings exists, is because there's a couple of different verses. Psalm 72 verse 10 talks about people coming to give him treasures. And in Isaiah 60 verse 6 it says that people from Midian, Ephah, and Sheba, 3, will give him gold and incense. So that's probably where people get that from. Once Joseph and Mary and Jesus had received the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh, what did they do with that? And second question is, would you consider them poor or rich after that? So in the book of Luke chapter 2, it says that Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day, and then Mary was still in Jerusalem or in Bethlehem after 40 days after her days of purification were over. And it says that they dedicated 2 turtle doves, and that's the thing that poor people would have dedicated. Now, if this had happened in that time frame, it would mean that they would have had enough money to afford a lamb, which is not the case, because the events that are happening in this chapter happen quite a long time after the immediate birth of Jesus. What they did with the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh, I think they probably sold it. I think he used the gold like money while he was living in Egypt, and it created a means for him to live over there. And where did he stay when he was in Egypt? More than likely, he probably stayed with a Jewish community like the one that was mentioned in the book of Acts in Antioch. So gold, some of this gold could have been given from Herod to the wise men so that they would give it to the Messiah, but they probably brought it from their own countries as well. Gold was given to kings. Frankincense is used at the altar in worship, and myrrh is the same kind of perfume that was put on Jesus during his burial, on his body during his burial. Verse 12, and being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. They were not just warned by an angel here, they were warned by God. Could have been an angel and just said an angel from God, but here it just says that they were warned from God. And so they didn't go down the same highway that they came, because the first thing that Herod would have done when they didn't return is search up and down the main highways of where they probably came from. For sure they said, hey, we come from this country and we saw the star. So more than likely he's going to be sending soldiers up and down the roads looking for these wise men. Verse 13, and when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. Do you see any connection here to this and the dragon of Revelation that's trying to eat the child? This is actually where it starts to parallel between the book of Exodus being in Egypt. Now, question: why did Joseph escape to Egypt and not to Nazareth if he's claiming that he's in Bethlehem? Okay, first of all, he was being in Bethlehem, he was closer to Egypt, so it would have made sense for him to escape out of the country. If he was in Bethlehem and he was escaping to Nazareth, for sure there were some people who knew who he was in Bethlehem. For example, in Luke chapter 2, you see strangers. You see shepherds. And the shepherds run around the whole town telling everybody that the Christ is born. So more than likely there's some people there that knew, or at least rumored, that Jesus was the Christ, being a child. And they probably knew who Joseph was. They probably knew that Mary was from Nazareth. So the second place I think that Herod would have looked was in the town of Nazareth, just to check and see if anybody had come through with a baby from Bethlehem. Okay, so why did Joseph escape to Egypt and not to some other country? Because that was the closest one. That was the closest one to him. Now, if they were currently in Nazareth at the time of this event, it would have made better sense for them to get out to Samaria, which is closer to them, rather than to travel 4 days a journey closer to Jerusalem, closer to the place of danger that they were at. The objective was to get them out of the country as fast as possible. Verse 14. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Egypt, which shows immediate action on Joseph's part. Verse 15. And he was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which is spoken by the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I have called my son, which is quoted from Hosea 11 verse 1. And this is where it begins to parallel the book of Exodus. 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, or tricked of the wise men, because they said that they would return, but they did not, was exceedingly wroth. He was very mad, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem. I think maybe just the male children, because he knew that this was that it was the Messiah that was supposed to be born was the son of David, not the daughter of David, and all the coast thereof from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men, which was 2 years ago, about 2 years or less than that. Now, this is not an event that was recorded outside of the Bible, even by Josephus, who recorded all of the works of Herod very closely. And the reason why is probably because he probably did this at nighttime. He probably disguised his people as Gentiles, the soldiers who came out to kill people. He wanted this to be done very quiet and very hush-hush. He did not want people to know about it, and I think that's the reason why it's not in history books. Now, this is another parallel, him killing all the children. It's kind of like in the book of Exodus when they were trying to kill the children as well. And if you look in Josephus's Antiquities and the Talmud, there's a non-canon story, not in the Bible. It's a non-canon story that talks about Moses. And in Egypt, there was a sorcerer who had a vision of a child who was born who was going to destroy Egypt, which was going to be Moses. And also the father of Moses had a dream about that same thing and tried to save his child, so put Moses in the basket. So years later, when Moses was already adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter, he was in the throne room with the Pharaoh, and took something like he took the crown off of his head, threw it to the ground, and that sorcerer who had the prophecy about him walked in and said, "That's the kid that I was prophesying about, kill him now." And the king says, or the princess says, "No, don't do that." They stop him. So it's kind of like a parallel in a way in the non-canon edition. Verse 17, then was fulfilled that was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, and this was in Jeremiah 31, verse 15. Verse 18, in Ramah there was a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. And this is the same area that Rachel was buried, and that's probably why it says that Rachel's weeping for her children. Verse 19, but when Herod was dead, which happened in 4 BC, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel. Does not specifically say what place to go to, just says you can go back to Israel now, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And therefore, since he does not specifically say where to go, more than likely Joseph is planning to go back to Bethlehem, his hometown. Verse 21, and he arose and took the young child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. And while they were with a caravan of people traveling around, which probably took them about a month to get back, verse 22, then he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judah in the room of his father Herod. And Archelaus is also called Herod, and this is the guy that Jesus was interacting with throughout his life. And he was afraid to go thither. He was afraid to go there. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee. So he turned from his path from going to Bethlehem to the parts of Galilee, Nazareth. Nazareth, in other words. Also, Herod Archelaus, the reason that he would be afraid to go there is because him being his son, he would not have been out of the loop as to what his father was doing. He would have known that the Messiah was on the rise, that he was about this old or so, and if he was returning back to Bethlehem, he would have known. For sure his father would have said, oh, by the way, there's going to be a guy arising probably, if we didn't kill him already, and he'll probably give you trouble. So they're probably on the lookout for him then. Verse 23, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, a very small town that people look down on, that it might be fulfilled which is spoken by the prophets, which says that he shall be called a Nazarene. And when it says that it's spoken by the prophets, this is not recorded anywhere else in the Bible or anywhere else in Scripture. More than likely, it was either a oral prophecy that was just passed down by word of mouth. Number two, it could have been a play on words from Isaiah 11, which calls him Netzer, which is a branch. Or number three, and I don't really agree with this very much, Nazarene probably means despised, which they take from Psalms 22, verse 6, and Isaiah 53, verse 3. I would probably subscribe to the idea that it was an oral word of mouth passing down that he would be called a Nazarene, which is not the same as someone who has taken the vow of the Nazarite, which means that they cannot cut their hair and they cannot eat grapes and they cannot drink wine, because as you know, Jesus drank wine, and that would have broken the vow of the Nazarite, or a Nazarene, and from there he would have had sin, and we know that Jesus was without sin. So what do you think? Is there anything that I missed? Do you have any comments or questions? Why is it not recorded in history that Herod made this massacre in Bethlehem and the surrounding areas? Please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.